Hello, if you're here for building a business case for adopting a component content management system for technical documentation, you're in the right place. My name is Scott Abel. I'll be the co-host of today's show with Patrick Bosek. We'll join them in just a minute. Let's hear from a few housekeeping items just for the folks that are new to the platform. Just so you know, we don't have access to your camera or your microphone during today's show, which just means that we can't see or hear you when we're talking to each other and broadcasting this show to you. We also are recording this show as we do with all the Content Wrangler webinars. You can watch a recording of the program about a half an hour after this live show ends just by copying the URL that you're using to watch today's live show, pasting it in a browser, and it'll pop you over to a recording. You can also share that link with others that you think would find the topic of today's show of interest, and we hope that you would do that. Also, asking questions is a thing. It's a talk show. We want your questions. In fact, anytime you feel the urge, just scroll down beneath your webinar viewing panel to click the Ask a Questions tab. You can fill out a little form and send those into Patrick and I. We will queue up as many as possible and try to get answers on the time that we've allotted for today's show. Also, there's some additional content in the attachments section, which is, as you might imagine, located just beneath your webinar viewing panel. Scrolling down a bit, you'll be able to find a link to our presenters' LinkedIn page where you can reach out and connect with them. There's also some resources and some discount information, other things you can peruse during the show. Keep in mind, if you click on any of those things, you won't lose your place in the show. It'll just open up a new browser and you'll be able to access that content. Also, we're going to ask you to complete 2 polls today. Taking the polls super easy. It's 1 question, 5 multiple choice answers. You pick the answer that's most appropriate for you. We're going to ask the first poll right now, which is, where are you on your journey to adopt DITA in a component content management system? Your answer choices are exploring the idea now, or trying to build the business case, or we're running a pilot project, or we're rolling it out now or soon. And the last choice is we're fully adopted and optimizing. If those fit you, go ahead and add your answers. Thank you. I see the audience members are doing that to the poll. This helps us contextually to answer the questions that you have a little better and know who's on the show today. So we really appreciate it. Also, at the end of the show, Patrick will remind you to do something we ask every show, which is to rate the quality of the information provided on our program using our 1 through 5-star rating system, in which 1 is a low rating and 5 is an exceptional one. There's also a little field into which you can type some feedback. We use that feedback to make the shows better in the future and also to share with the presenter. So don't be shy. It's something we want you to do. And if you can take a moment, you can just scroll down beneath your webinar viewing panel and click a few buttons and you'll give us some feedback. And we really appreciate it. I'd like to also encourage you to consider entering the Cody Awards, which is kind of the Academy Awards of the web. It's a over 40 years, I think now, old program that recognizes good work on the web. And this year, we've got a new category that we've added a couple of years ago called Best Knowledge Center, which you can think of as a help site or a documentation portal. So if your doc portal is award worthy, or if you just like to get some feedback from some folks who are looking at this, to give you best practices and suggestions for the future, definitely take a look at that. And I hope you'll join Patrick and I this fall in October 5th through the 8th to be exact, in Atlanta, Georgia for the LavaCon conference on content strategy and technical communication management. This conference attracts around 400 of your peers. It's a super fun conference, in addition to being very much a learning experience. Some multiple track sessions so that you have a variety of best practices, case studies, and lessons learned presentations you can attend. There's a great exhibition hall where you can see the tools and technologies available to our industry, as well as service providers that provide consulting and other kinds of services. And it's a great networking event as well. You can save 10% off the cost of registration when you use our discount code TCW at checkout, and there's a link to that in the attachments section. And one final note, we'd like to thank Heretto, the sponsor of the Content Wrangler webinar channel. Heretto is an AI-enabled component content management system platform that's in use around the globe to deploy documentation and developer portals that delight customers. Let's hear from one of their customers right now.
I've been in the software industry 35 years, and one of the things I love about Medallia is we make companies better. At Medallia Product Documentation Team, we have a goal, and our goal is that our documentation is the first and last place that people go to find information about our product. Product documentation is the official source of truth about what is supposed to be in the product. It has to be accurate, it has to be up to date, and it has to be accessible. Documentation, as I see it, is proactive, whereas support and knowledge centers are more reactive. Having good product documentation is key to supporting the product and to eliminating downstream costs. When a customer can self-service their own answer, it's a win for everybody. The customer gets the answer quicker, you reduce costs of support, and everybody's happy in the end.
All right, welcome to Coffee and Content. I'm Scott Abel, your co-host, and with me is Patrick Bosek. Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes, it's good to be here, Scott.
Yes.
Very excited to have, so Mel, I've always known you as Mel, but you, Melanie Denise Davis. Do you want to go by Mel, Melanie, Denise?
Yes. Any and all of those. So I've got two sisters, Dawn and Donna. So growing up, I was Denise at home. So people that know me through my family call me Denise. So close friends, family called me Denise. People that have met me at work use my first name, which is Melanie. And when they warm to me, they call me Mel. So.
All right. Well,
I've warned you a long time ago, Mel.
Yes, indeed.
Because Scott called you Denise as we were getting on the show, and I was like, oh my God, have I been calling her Mel and I shouldn't?
No. I just saw Scott because he lives near a friend of mine. So we were hanging out. So he calls me Denise when we're with friends.
We might have had a few margaritas where that was
There might have been.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to stick with Mel because I think I've warmed to you in a professional context, and that seems appropriate. So welcome. I'm very excited about having you here. And very excited about the conversation today about building a business case for DITA and structured content, something that is near and dear to my heart as well. So we want to jump into the topic, Scott?
Yeah, in fact, let's start there. I think you've got you at the first question, in fact.
All right, great. So Mel, before we actually get into the topic today, do you want to give us your background, your connection to the topic, and just a little bit about you?
Sure. So everyone, I'm Mel Davis, or Denise. I am the president of Dragonfly Diva Docs LLC, a concierge-level content consultancy. My technical writing, editing, and project management bridges the gap between technical complexity and user-friendly content for diverse industries, including data unification, master data management, healthcare, finance, enterprise software, and content orchestration. I was previously senior manager of content tools and operations for Reltio, a SaaS company. And there we built a new documentation tech stack of CCMs, federated search, style governance, video development tools. I was also responsible for recommending and implementing technical writing tools as the technical communications and training lead at GE Healthcare for over 10 years. I've been a technical writer since the mid-'80s. I've been creating structured content since the days of information mapping, the original content management system, server-side includes, that's SSI technology, introduced markup languages to separate content from formatting. I worked on Unix system when formatting was limited to troff and nroff type settings. But I've continued my journey through the introduction of standard generalized markup language, SGML, in the 80s, and DITA XML in the 90s, and through to today. Even after decades of experience designing, developing, delivering, and leading content strategy and operations projects for multinational enterprises, governmental agencies, startups, and individuals, I'm still wildly curious about new documentation processes, tools, and technologies. There's always a way to do things better, faster, smarter. I love opportunities to talk about our industry, our tools, our best practices. Thanks for having me today.
Woo! Well, then you've got an opportunity right now because I would like you to start with the big picture, since we know you've got the big picture of the technical documentation industry in your mindset right there. Why do the viewers of our show need to, if they're technical documentation professionals on a team, why do they need to better understand how to communicate return on investment? What's the challenge there?
Because it's not a given. Business leaders need to hear value in business terms that they understand, like efficiency, savings, risk reduction. Before we get to how you talk about that, you need to lay a baseline. And the first thing is you don't assume that our stakeholders understand that we're actually coding content. We're just not writing reports in productivity tools. Our teams aren't limited to Google Docs, Microsoft Word, and Sheets or Excel or Slides and PowerPoint to create our deliverables. And so if you can draw parallels to the specialty teams that your stakeholders use, For instance, software developer, draw those parallels to their integrated development environments, their IDEs. That's their software app that helps them develop software code efficiently and increases their productivity by combining their capabilities into a single application. Support, draw that parallel to their customer relationship management team, their CRM and their help desk software with ticketing systems, live chat, email support. Sales and marketing also use CRM systems for managing customer interactions and leads, email marketing platforms. Finance uses enterprise resource planning, ERP software to manage their day-to-day business activities. They're not being asked to limit their work to basic productivity tools. They have a tool set that is specifically designed to make them more productive and proficient. Get customer input. You want to review any customer praise and complaints that could be addressed with better tooling for your team. If you don't have one, I recommend you create a content customer advisory board so you get direct input for customers.
Awesome. Before we continue on, I would just want to give you a little information about the audience so far. So ask a polling question. Audience, you can still participate in the poll if you'd like. The polling question is, where are you on your journey to adopt the Darwin information typing architecture and a component content management system? And so far, 42% of our audience watching the show today say they are exploring the idea right now. 20% say they're trying to build a business case, which is the challenging part. And we're here to talk about that. So hopefully we'll get some good questions. 4% are running a pilot project right now. 28% claim to be rolling it out now or soon. And 4% of the show respondents say, hey, we are adopted. We've been optimizing our content and did it with the CCMS for quite a while now. So we've got a good mix of people on today's show.
It's perfect. That is perfect. And I think that's a really, really important point for the large number that are running a POC. You have to show them, your stakeholders, what they're missing. And so even before you start a POC, those of you that aren't there yet, create a workflow diagram of your current processes with your current tools. Detail those steps that show the time and the resource expenditures and really highlight the pain points. Then you contrast that with a projected workflow diagram indicating how that CCMS is expected to reduce or eliminate those highlighted pain points. So then you get to where so many are already, which is illustrate that process by creating either an interactive mock-up, and you can work with your UX team if you have one, or you can sketch that out yourself, or actually create a POC with a trial version of your chosen CCMS. Pick a particular troublesome portion and just do a proof of concept.
I love that idea of making it visual. I think that can really bring it out for the for people who aren't in it every day. What have you seen when you put those together as being light bulb moments for people who are not on the technical content team?
Well, I'm going to give you an example. So at a former employer, every year at budget time, I would ask for document tech stack tools. And it was routinely denied every year because, those kind of tools are for developers. You're just writers. Now, that was back in the day, even when expense wasn't the issue. They just didn't believe that there were developer tools for creating documentation as there were for creating software. So going back to those things I just suggested in my proposal the following year, I explained information development in the terms of software development, including processes and tools. So I expressed it in terms that was meaningful for my target audience there, in that case, the head of software development. I also reached out to other documentation teams in the organization who shared their proposals and the doc tech stack tools they used. And then I partnered with a UX developer in my department to create a POC of the type of help center we were proposing. We really didn't have tools. So we sketched out the information architecture, and then I hand coded in HTML in Notepad++ an entire site with some content completed in areas. And then he managed all of the JSON provided by the other documentation teams for the tools they were using. Well, when we showed that to the stakeholders, they were wowed. Yes, please. We would like that. Great. So if you want to have that, in order for us to scale and maintain it, we need the appropriate tools. So we got them. We quickly created the full site, and then we were soon being asked by other product teams in our organization to create similar help sites for them. Never had to argue for tool renewals.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. I love that.
I
So
do
the
too.
mock-up is the thing that unlocked it for you. As soon as it became real to people, and now it's a thing like they could actually reach out and touch, they felt like they would be willing to open up their purse strings.
And Mel, in addition to the visual, did you have a storytelling kind of angle to get them in to pay attention to it, to see the insights that you were hoping they'd see?
Yes, and a lot of it was based on their own anecdotes of pain and their own complaints about the inadequacies and the shortcomings, and why can't you be like Timmy? He's such a nice kid. So
Timmy has
basically,
face on, that's why.
exactly. So yes, the overall big ticket is the thing that we do best as technical writers, which is explain it in the terms our users understand and tell that story, make it something that they understand. And so let me expand on that to say the thing that we often find uncomfortable is crunching numbers. We typically prefer words to numbers, but here's where we lean into our superpower. We research and write for target audiences. So don't go it alone. Ask for the models your other cross-functional teams use to justify the investment in their tools. If you're already using AI, get it to help identify inputs and define formulas and generate figures you can share. But your purpose is to illustrate how the right tool set can help scale productivity and volume faster than getting additional writers or having longer delivery timeframes.
And that makes a ton of sense. So when you're thinking about defining ROI, in more specific terms, like when it comes to technical content, like what metrics do you find most persuasive?
Well, we need to talk about in terms of finance, marketing, branding, compliance, and customer loyalty. And that's particularly important now as many businesses are reevaluating income expenses in response to anticipated or actual economic contractions. So there are some metrics that will help you prove how you increase or decrease aspects to improve your outcomes. So you can use quantitative metrics that provide objective, measurable data on productivity and efficiency or time and cost savings. But beyond that, think about qualitative metrics, subjective experiential data on behavior and preferences, and then segment those so that you can illustrate the cross-functional benefits to the organization beyond the documentation team. So the ask is not that the documentation team gets a special tool set. It is that you equip the documentation team to provide the user needs that serve the business's objectives in the same way that other teams do. So you can look at this in several areas. What are your metrics for development and delivery of content? Well, you can look at content velocity, and that can be on a sprint basis if you're working in Agile or a release basis. You can look at writer and SME draft review cycles, look at the number of iterations, the duration of those, and how you can improve that. If you are localizing your content, then you want to look at the turnaround time that can be improved with a CCMS. Publishing time does matter. So how much time does it take you to publish weekly or for major releases, or even the ability to quickly turn around an emergency release? Content reuse means something to us. It does not necessarily to stakeholders. So that needs to be expressed in ways that help them understand the time and cost savings. So we are not going to the tailor to have a bespoke suit made every day. We are going to pick a suit from the rack that's already been made in multiple sizes. So there's one that fits this particular need.
I really like that.
Yeah. Time to market, how long is it going to take us to push things out? So way back in the day when we were, doing printed manuals, and an important measurement when you were selling enterprise level software was what we used to refer to as the thunk factor. If somebody had spent tens of thousands of dollars on your software, they wanted a manual that when it hit the desk went thunk. So you're looking for the equivalent of the thunk faster now, and that takes us to metrics on user engagement, content quality and performance. So here you're looking at usability. Is it readable, accurate, complete, consistent, helpful? If your content is online, you can look at metrics like the number of page views, the average time people spend on a page, how quickly they leave that page, the bounce rate, how many pages per session, what's their click-through rate. An important one that sometimes we forget is content conversion. Many times, customers are converted after reading the technical documentation, not the marketing.com site. And finally, compliance. Many industries have requirements for documentation that have to meet certain regulatory restrictions. So that is an important metric to track. And then finally, think about customer support and user satisfaction. How does your documentation reduce onboarding time? How does it reduce the number of support calls and tickets and the resolution time that is facilitated by your support team being able to easily find documentation and the ability to then share that quickly with the end users for future reference? So you also want to look at documentation specific support calls and tickets so that you are making improvements to the content to address needs customers have expressed. You're going to look at what marketing does, which is customer satisfaction scores, so CSAT or NPS scores. And then customer self-service, we all know, is a huge watchword right now. So how is the documentation helping to reduce the customer's friction and increase their satisfaction?
That was a lot of good information very quickly. Thank you for doing that. I think I was taking notes the whole time. So that's good. One of the things I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the audience again. So we open the second question. So one question for the audience and then a question for Mel. So the question for the audience is, if you have sought funding to adopt DITA and a CCMS, what was your outcome? So far, and so audience members, please take the poll, but so far the poll is 66% of the people who have answered the poll so far, and it's changing a little bit right now, had their request deferred, meaning that decision makers postpone the request. 16% have partial approval. They got some funding, but they had to scale back their scope or their timeline just because of that. 16% of the people on the call say they got full approval for what they asked for. They received the requested budget and launched the project. No one has reported that their funding has been rejected yet, but those numbers are still changing. But that's pretty interesting, I think.
That is a pretty good success rate, actually.
Yeah, not bad. I mean, it's a limited number of people, so it's not everybody, obviously, that's ever asked for money for something. And there's like 16% of the people said they were rejected. Another 16% say other. So those numbers are changing. But I think the biggest one was deferred. So far, deferred. Did that ever happen to you?
Absolutely. And I just want to stop and give a shout out to the person that really clarified this for me, Megan Gahuli, whom I had the privilege of working with and for in 2 companies. And I watched her obtain in under 2 years approval for a complete documentation tech stack of 5 tools. She showed me the necessity of metrics and how to present ROI for making an undeniable business case. So what we learn here is that what you track is what you focus on. And so you have to have the data to support your request. And we tend to put off capturing those metrics as a distraction or a struggle because we're always racing against the release clock. But we have to make time. And as my teams will attest, my motto is, oh, there's no time like the present. Let's do it now. Track your publishing times during the process. So we segmented our process into distinct phases by stage and by tool. And then we created a spreadsheet that we'd fill in during every weekly release so that we could quickly show the time savings of our tools implementations and our process improvements. You also need to define and track web analytics regularly. You have to find out not just what matters to you and your team, but what matters to your stakeholders. That's back to those quantitative metrics that are likely to help you identify and prioritize your content development. Those help stakeholders see the business value content provides. So persistence is important. As I said, I spent years on one company trying to crack that code to get to the thing that we learned. So you're doing the right thing here and in your other research into seeing how other people have managed to do that. So be clear, be well supported with facts, and draw parallels to the other groups that also have industry-specific tools.
You've touched on a thing here a few times that I've seen be very successful, which is that you need to align what you're asking for to what the business's current objectives are.
Yes.
So put another way is be curious. When you're going to the other parts of the business to figure out what it is that matters to them, really dig into, here are their objectives. How does this align up to the corporate objectives? And the thing that's really interesting, and I think you can get lost in it as a negative, but on the positive side, it's a lot of opportunity, is that a CCMS and the stack up to self-service, it can touch so many parts of the customer journey that there's almost never a situation that an organization isn't going to get some benefit out of it. So it's really just a matter of like crafting the right story and touching the right metrics, as opposed to like whether or not there's a value there for the organization with where it stands at its current moment. So I think if you're curious and you like align your language, you pick the right metrics, and like you align to what the organization is doing, I've seen that be much more successful than just focusing on what matters to your group.
Absolutely. Right.
Al, I've got another question for you too.
Okay.
When you were talking about content reuse earlier, you made a point that leaders don't always understand what it is we're trying to talk about when we see it because it's so obvious to us. So what operational benefits have you seen in the companies that you helped to implement content reuse across different deliverables or teams? What is the benefit aside from what tech writers think?
Exactly. And it's those two things. What's the benefit to us? And as Patrick said, what's the benefit to everybody else? So let's look at how we're serving our cross-functional peers with a CCMS system. Well, we're helping SMEs who provide content reviews. So if we can give them integrated review tools that save time and our time in exporting content emails to multiple reviewers, it makes it easier for them to find and review in place the content. And then they can also look at the content, the review comments from other reviewers. So back in the day, when we were still doing things on paper, I would photocopy 10, 12 issues of a 900-page document, circulate that through all of my stakeholders, and have to review printed feedback from all of those places. And then I'd have a set of colored pens. And for every review copy, I'd take a colored pen and I would add all of those comments into the master copy. And then I would do that again for the next time. Well, you can't address conflicting comments when other people can't see them. So that's a huge benefit to reviewers. Localization, we get to do that directly out of the CCMS. There's no need to go through the time-consuming process of exporting all of our content into a zip, uploading it into a TMS, waiting for that to come back, downloading it, and so that's a cost savings. Release teams, we can be quicker. We can have a more scalable publishing pipelines for not just scheduled releases, but for emergency documentation releases that can be done alongside or independent of software or hardware releases. Training, much easier to collaborate with our training colleagues who are writing similar content based on the same underlying information, but presented for different target users. And so being able to share some of the sources and provide each other links more quickly for the doc portal in the LMS is a benefit for them. Well, what about consumption? Customer support are a big winner from these systems. They get a single source of approved content that they can link to in our online docs and that they can reference in their knowledge bases. And when it's done well and you have good collaboration, the docs team is not writing something that the training team is writing something and the knowledge base is writing something unrelated and inconsistent. You get to have some collaboration and therefore consistency. Do you have a community? Awesome. It's great for them to be able to link to approved content rather than having to recreate similar content. And similarly for marketing, giving them links from the .com side to ours to continue the customer journey from interest to conversion.
We're at the halfway point of the show, so I just wanted to say to the audience members, you can still ask a question anytime. In fact, we've got a couple questions that have already came in, but we've got room for a few more. So if you've got one for our guest, please scroll down a little bit beneath your webinar viewing panel and ask it. The question I have for you, Mel, before we take on the rest of the interview is, how do you make the connection to the content improvements and content quality or consistency or whatever it is that you're arguing with the measurable business outcome, like a reduced support cost? A lot of times technical writers aren't schooled on how to do that before they get a job as a tech writer.
Yes. Well, we want to talk with those other stakeholders so that we understand the terms that they are using. We want to go from talking about not just our outcomes, but the impact to the business. And so we have to translate from what we accomplished to what was the business impact. So for instance, we'll say, oh, we're going to have a new updated doc site. Nice. Okay, that gives us easier access to the information. Good. What does that mean to the business? Well, it's going to increase customer self-service. It's going to improve our CSAT and NPS promoter scores. Well, we're going to have new improved information architecture and taxonomy and style. Well, that's going to give us more predictable and consistent navigation of content. We're improving our content accuracy, comprehensiveness to make it easier to read, more reliable, and up to date. But again, in business terms, what we're talking about is user confidence and positive referrals and provision of content that matters most to users. The stats on the page, the number of words, the images, that's for us about a validation of our capacity and velocity projections, as are a lot of our site analytics. But that helps us with customer identified issues and priorities for content, which then allows us to express that as a decrease in support calls and tickets, a decrease in customer dissatisfaction, user distrust, negative reviews, and it allows us to remove unused content, keep the site up to date. So one of the things I like to teach writers as they're moving through their career paths is be a 3-year-old and keep saying why. But why? Why?
Or why not?
And why not?
So in your answer there, I think there is a subtext that I've noticed through my years in this industry. You talked a lot about, and you have other answers here too, the value of web traffic, of people interacting. You enumerated a number of ways those are valuable. I think one of the things that technical content creators, information developers often run into is that they understand the value of that traffic, that like how it's servicing the customer, but it's less just generally understood and accepted in like executive management than traffic on the Marcom site. Like the equation between traffic on the Marcom site and value is very simple in most people's minds. More traffic, better, right? Like this is going to sell stuff somehow. It's digital engagement, et cetera. And I think because we're close to it, we often assume that people understand that traffic on a self-service site, a doc site, a help site is also really positive for the organization, but maybe that association isn't necessarily made in everyone's minds who's further away from it. So I've seen success with groups who have really firmly created that association. So like this traffic generates this result. It has a direct impact on bottom line for the organization, be it through reduction in support requests or actual increase in customer and revenue. Because like you said earlier, Mel, oftentimes a customer or a prospect's last stop before they buy is they go to the doc site to see if it's going to work in their circumstance, or if they really fully trust this organization, or if this organization is enterprise enough to service their requirements. So I think drawing that connection is really, really critical when people are making these cases.
It is, and it goes back to what I was saying. If we don't have the data to support that people are not operating from our perspective, so we have to help them see that. So in a previous role, I was attending a cross-functional leadership meeting where support and customer success were regularly highlighting where documentation failings were negatively impacting their KPIs and metrics. And I wasn't armed with my own metrics, couldn't refute it. So I scheduled meetings with those teams to see how they were gathering those metrics, because they'd never consulted me to get any metrics from our processes. And so first I assured them I was determined to address those issues. And then we worked collaboratively. So I was able to show them the improvements that we had made. And then we worked out where we needed to fill the gaps so that they actually had the information to have better rounded results. And I was able to identify and prioritize where we needed to fill gaps. So that was the advantage of having a well-structured content in a CCMS. We were able to quickly identify everywhere that we needed to apply those corrections and updates, and to identify opportunities for reuse to improve future maintenance. So we then moved on to creating and publishing metrics that enabled the organization to see our accomplishments in ways that mattered to them, and to help prioritize content that mattered most for their business impact. And one thing I will suggest is that you highlight your team's expertise. People in software and hardware typically are educated to degree level. They've written lots of paper to get that degree, and so they believe that any fool can write. And I agree with them entirely. Any fool can write poorly. What we do is very specialist, and so it's important to help people see not just the value of the tools, but the value of our expertise, and why we need those tools. They don't question software engineers in the same way. And so to help them see our value is important.
Mel, I was just going to say, I just came back from LA, as you know, since we were having margaritas a couple nights later, at the Content Marketing Summit, where I, in Scott Abel fashion, decided I would beat them over the head with one point until they left the room understanding what it was. And my point was, the first stop on the customer journey is a help article, not your marketing website. And what happened? Many marketing people in the audience were like, they didn't know. They're bewildered by the whole concept. What are you talking about, a help article? But some of them were like, oh, I think that might be right. And that's not their job. They don't know how. They're not going to refashion our, documentation portal or make us our content operations fabulous because, I did a talk. But they had an aha moment. Do you think that we're not good enough yet at explaining that this is a thing, that the help site might be the first customer experience that anyone has with your brand?
I agree, Scott. I think people don't appreciate it. For many people, like the help site is the port of last resort. Right? I've failed. I'm not clever enough. I'm reduced to looking at the documentation. Not so. The documentation gives us the broad overview of the product that we're buying, and it helps us see whether it's going to meet our needs. But also importantly, it helps us see, are we going to get the assistance we need once we have this product? Is the information here easy enough to understand? Are we able to find links to the support, or has that been hidden? It really is your calling card. This is the real face of your product. It's where people, as the Heredo preview video showed us, it should be the first and last place people look for information about your product.
Yeah, we just have to work on communicating that better, I think.
Yes. Another thing that you can do to communicate better is to communicate with those peers. So I started adding meetings to talk to my peers in the marketing side, and in sales and in support and customer success. And the focus of my meeting is why what I do matters to you. And so what are the inputs I need from you? What do you need back from me? And look at that similarity. Gosh. So help them see you as a colleague, not a service. And personal relationships, as we're just indicating in the show, are important. So take a virtual coffee break and talk about things. We started spending a lot more time with our training peers, who are also hideously under-resourced, to collaborate on, let's just create one video and then share that. Because the steps are going to be the same, whether they're in a training course or in a procedure on the portal. We're going to diverge on concept, but the reference information is the same and the how-to steps are the same. So spend as much time socializing as you can, and that's fair even when you are working remotely. I worked with Scott and Patrick for years remotely, and I think I met Patrick in person for the first time 2 months ago.
Was it really the first time we ever met in person?
Wow.
Yeah.
It didn't feel that way. Then see, but that's how good it can be. It can be that
Right.
good virtually if we do it well. Because it felt like we had seen each other many times before that.
I'd met a former colleague that I'd worked with for probably 10 years. And I met him in person for the first time at that Convex conference.
Wow, really?
And yes, now my younger sister and I have a joke that during COVID we were not tall. So I am tall. I'm 5'10". And so I met this chap, and he looked up at me and said, "You never said you were tall."
That's
All
really
right. Patrick, do you have another question before we start grabbing questions from the audience?
Oh, I do. And so this one was one of our standard questions, but it seems very relevant with the poll. So given that we have 36% deferred and 21% just rejected outright, Mel, how do you answer the question, why should we invest in a CCMS now?
Because we've already been left behind by the competitors. So with our ever-increasing tech debt, that erodes customer confidence and trust. The time we're spending pushing our broken down car to the next service station is time we can't spend on getting to our actual destination. Following on instead of being able to release our software simultaneously with the content doesn't engender trust. Having incomplete, inaccurate, and inconsistent content provides a poor customer experience. A modern CCMS sets us up to attract and retain users. It enables scale, speed, and governance. It enables simultaneous, even global content releases. It enables technical writers to work more closely with software developers in agile release cycles. And it enables us to respond to the urgency for AI readiness. Structured content is the key to success. It doesn't have to be DITA, but that is the quickest and easiest way to ensure you are creating well-structured content. I mean, who wants to go to a hairdresser with messy hair? Are you going to see a dentist with missing teeth? Putting a suit jacket over a torn t-shirt is not going to win you a Best Dress award. Be the full package. Put your money where your organization's mouth is, which is what we just said where? On the documentation. Let the polish on your content reflect the investment in your software.
Oh, I love that. I think that's going to be a t-shirt. Just so you know, don't be surprised when I show up with that. It'll be a
purple t-shirt. Okay.
A purple t-shirt, however. All right, let's take a question from the audience too. So Tina wants to know, all right, so what would your advice be if you were presented with a team of people that have different ideas than what you might have as the leader, and they would like docs as code, for example, and they're like, hey, we don't want to learn all this other stuff. How do you discern the business case value of two competing ideas in a way that makes sense to your internal team? Because you need to agree and present like a common front, right? When you go to ask for money, you shouldn't be all schizophrenic. They're not going to respect that, right? They need a clear message that's very value focused. So how do you do that comparison and then help your team understand why the organization needs to make the decisions they make?
It's a good point, and it just reflects the real world that we're in. I don't think I've ever been on or managed a team where we were all 100% aligned on process, procedures, or tools. So the key thing is to engage everybody in the process, ensure everybody has a chance to present their perspective, which they must back up with data. That helps us to define what are our objectives for improving our development cycle and meeting the customer needs. Then you want to take that to other stakeholders and say, do you agree these are the objectives that we need to meet? Are there any other pain points that we might need to address? Another useful thing is to go to other documentations. If you're in a big global enterprise environment, there are many documentation teams, and you can consult with them to see what tools they've chosen, what arguments they made. Talk to people that got the specific tools for their environment. Talk to your support team about their CRM and knowledge base. Talk to your training team about their LMS. Talk to um, your finance team about their ERPs. What you're after is to address the customer need. We all have personal preferences and pet peeves, but in the same way that we'd all quite like to, write in our very own personal exciting voice, we have to write to corporate standards. And so the objective is not that everybody's going to agree, but that everybody will be heard, and that then having arrived at the conclusion that will best serve the purpose, then we all have to be on board.
Thank you for that. All right, Patrick, do you want to grab another question from the audience?
Sure. All right. So Matt says the argument here is organized and makes sense. However, it doesn't address the current surreal nature of the market. I have been in several orgs that have made a point of saying they can ship their product without docs.
Then those orgs too.
Hold on. There's more. There's more. Pause was mine. The argument here assumes a rational evaluation effort. I wonder if we need more of a DATA-esque. I actually don't know what that is.
DATA-esque.
From data.
DATA-esque. Yeah, we'll Google that for you later.
Yeah. Matt, if you want to tell me what that is, I would love to be enlightened. DATA-esque toolkit. What would you recommend in the face of surrealism? In parentheses, I'm not joking, by the way.
Well, fortunately, one of my passions is art.
Okay.
And so surrealism has its place in the framework of art. I think you are absolutely right. We are not living in an age of reason on many fronts. And so you will have to choose your battles. But most importantly is you have to understand your enemy. So try to understand what their points of resistance are. Is it a fundamental dislike or just dismissal of the value of what we do? Is it an underlying conceit that they could do what we do without spending all this money? Is it an either or thing? Is it, well, if I spend that money on you, I don't get to have another developer? So it's important not to just address the face value of it, but to do the research, try to understand that target user and speak to them. And then just from a psychological viewpoint, work out how to get that person on your side.
That seems like
what's
really
in it
good
for them.
Yeah.
And help them see that.
I'll add one thing to that, because I think that there's also the core aspect of the data just doesn't support that you can ship product without documentation. So Pareto, we run a bunch of help sites, so we get to see a little bit behind the curtain here. And on average, documentation sites have as much traffic as Marcom sites. So for organizations that want to leave like half of their digital experience, like their standard web-based digital experience on the table, I mean, I guess you can make that choice, but it seems like a really poor choice.
I want to say the other thing that I think that technical writers are victimized by is that just because you belong to a big company doesn't mean you have a good leader. And it doesn't mean that the management understands the concepts, even in technical documentation teams. And I mentor several technical writers who have been made managers. Why? Do they have any special management skills? Absolutely not. Have they been taught how to do ROI calculations? Nope. Do they know procurement? No. All the answers no. But why are they there? They're the longest living technical writer on the team. And so therefore they're set up to not necessarily succeed because they don't have everything they need. So their best intentions aren't always good enough, right? Do you see that, Mel? Just among people, we really want to do a good job, but sometimes we just don't have the skills or the chops to do it.
Right. I've not only seen it, I've lived it. I've worked in maybe 2 companies in my 40-year career where there were separate tracks for professional advancement. One for, the technical track, and one for personnel management. So very often people become the managers because, as you say, they have the longevity and role. And that's not necessarily where their talents lie. And then frequently the organization fails to provide them the training they need to become good leaders. So the other difficulty we face is that nobody quite knows where we fit. So sometimes you're in software development, sometimes you're in training, sometimes you're in support. I've actually been in marketing. They're not sure. And so that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we have to do a better job of explaining what we do and why we do it before we get to this how we do it with better tools. It's a really fair question. It's one you should continue to chat with people, colleagues on LinkedIn about, because it's pain we're all familiar with, and maybe somebody in an industry close to yours will have just the magic ticket for you. But the data, the research, and personalizing that request so that there's something in it for each of the stakeholders that you're trying to serve.
Do you think that you and I's experience working in regulated environments, I'm thinking back to your GE healthcare and my pharmaceutical experience, we were working for companies that are 100% based on science. So all of the documents that we were reading and trying to reinterpret for whomever, the regulators or whoever we were trying to write for, we were using science-based principles, right? Biology, chemistry, blah, 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 all of that. And they're never ever questioning any of that. That's not a thing there. That is already established. That's what we do. I always wondered, they didn't understand that there was, communication science, information management science, information development management science, localization science, like neuroscience, but the neuroscience of content, right? And once you communicated that, at least in my experience, I got more respect as the TechCom team, because they were like, wait a minute, are they using science over there? I thought they were just creative people, like doing shots of Jägermeister at night, smoking joints, and then waking up writing some shit.
Right, right, and
discipline,
and just criticizing their grammar and punctuation. So I mean, that's something that I think over the years we've learned. We have to kind of step back from being the grammar police.
Yeah.
I mean, because sometimes you guys will recognize this. You've sent something out for review, and it comes back with somebody having scrawled triumphantly in red, or you misspelled this. I'm like, okay, I didn't misspell it. I can spell. I have the spelling trophies to prove it, but it's a typo. And you know what? We make mistakes too, and that takes us back to another value of the CCMS. You can do structured writing without DITA. But you're going to make typos. So if you have DITA, it throws up some of those guardrails that helps you avoid some of those egregious errors.
Excellent. All right, Patrick, grab the next question.
Okay, the next one comes from Kathleen. There we go. When it comes to DITA, I find the arguments for internal benefits come a lot easier, but I struggle to communicate the customer value to justify the cost and effort. Aside from improved search experience and content organization, parentheses, which are admittedly huge, what other justifications would you recommend to communicate customer benefits?
Oh, that is such a good question. It is the difference between riding a bicycle and a Ferrari. We're going to get them to the information faster. They shouldn't see the difference between just structured content that you've thoughtfully put together in a Word and one that has been carefully crafted and refined in CCMS that has a higher powered engine. The business benefit is that you're going to get the content faster. It's going to be more consistent. It's going to be more scalable. It's going to be easier to maintain. If I have to open 80 different Word documents to work and then find in each of those where I have to apply this one change that marketing asked us to rebrand a particular product name, that's a lot of time and effort. If I can open a CCMS and change a variable and then simply recompile it, that's it. So we're looking at time and cost benefits of development and publishing, not necessarily in the outcome.
And I like to translate those when I'm thinking about them out into how that impacts the customer. So I often express this in terms of the long tail of content. So when you think about like how much, how do content efficiency improvements happen in the customer's experience? Well, if you think about a long tail, so it's a graph, like this with a long tail of things that you can address. All teams are covering the very beginning of that because that's kind of how teams staff. But the challenge is that a lot of the customer experience happens in those questions and interactions and occurrences that are stretched out along that long tail. When you have a team which is vastly more efficient, you can move along that tail with more content and more experience and cover more cases. So, maybe not everybody who's in executive management or on other teams sees the value of a technical content team working faster, just for the purposes of those people, being more efficient. But when you can cover more and more and more cases, have more searches available on Google, avoid more things that are going to be, sticky situations in self-service, that's when I think those efficiency benefits really actually have an impact. It's kind of where the rubber hits the road, going all the way back to the Ferrari and the bicycle that Mel started with.
Good point, Patrick. Absolutely.
Hey, I also think there's a question that we could probably slip in here if you've got time, Mel. How would you advise to argue against a CCMS and DITA against, let's say, AI-driven semantic content processing solutions that, as this user says, is promising easy wins? How do you think about that?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
AI doesn't think yet. It has to be trained. And so if it is not trained with the relevant expertise, it's not going to give you much value. AI developers tend to just elbow aside technical writers when they're developing AI agents. So in one experience, they had a very lengthy first effort scraping the final HTML from our doc site and then using that static snapshot of our data. And then, of course, customers were frustrated that AI agent was providing out-of-date and inaccurate responses. So with insistence, we were able to persuade the developers to use APIs to query our structured content so that they were always getting the latest published content. And therefore, the AI was able to provide more accurate and up-to-date content with fewer hallucinations. The Ferrari is not going to win the race with a toddler behind the wheel. You have to have an experienced race driver at the wheel to really get the best out of that machine.
It should also be pointed out that when I visited the Ferrari factory a few years ago, when I was at the world's largest technical documentation conference, TC World, we found out that they too use science and also structured content and things like that. So that means they understand the velocity is not just important for that car motor and the car itself, but also for all the information that powers their company. So that was an interesting aside. How about, Patrick, the last question that we usually ask everybody?
Absolutely. Also, I apologize people who asked questions that we didn't get to. This one had a lot, so thank you for the questions, and we'll see if maybe we can grab some of them offline. Before we go, Mel, what is the most exciting thing happening in the world of content today?
Well, I've been at this a while, as I suggested. I was here when we went from DOS to OS2. So I remember when graphical user interfaces were introduced. Bonus point to anybody that can tell us what the acronym was before graphical user interfaces.
Or if they know what DOS is, for that matter.
I know! I'm still using DOS. It's under the hood. Function key interfaces, right? So I have been along this journey, and it's the thing that continues to fascinate me, is the continuing evolution of tools. So I'm actually very excited about AI, but I'm interested in using it as a research assistant and a collaborator. It's not at a point where it's going to write better than I do. Certainly not going to write better than Scott does. But I'm exploring ways of using AI to address some of the resourcing constraints that technical documentation teams face. So I'm using it to perform research and information gathering and to make summaries so that we can reduce the reliance on busy SMEs. right? Working on creating some mini agents that will perform some very specific writing tasks better suited to automation, such as API reference docs and error messages and tooltips. I mean, how useful are those tooltips that simply repeat the label? It's something that makes us all groan and roll our eyes. We don't have the time to take care of it. That's a real win for automation. So we want to allow our real writers to invest their time and talents in developing content that requires creative and innovative thinking.
That's a pretty good answer. And it will have to be the last word because we are over, we're really out of time. We are over the show time. So I'd like to thank the audience. And Patrick, would you like to ask them to give us a rating?
Absolutely. On your way out, please provide us a rating. And if you can, any comments or feedback on the show, we read every one of them and we try to incorporate them into future episodes.
Awesome. Thanks, audience members. You can find the voting feature right beneath your webinar viewing panel, along with all the other content we told you about earlier. Don't be shy. Click on any of those links and access the information provided. You'll also get an email thanking you for attending the show, which will include links to that content in case you forget. Thanks for joining us for Coffee and Content, building a business case for adopting a component content management system for technical documentation with our special guest, Melanie Denise Davis. Thanks for joining us. As always, be safe, be well, keep doing great work, and we'll see you again on another episode of Coffee and Content in the near future. Thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Ben. Bye.